I stood in the empty living room of what used to be my childhood home, my fingers trailing along the wall where my height marks should have been. They'd been painted over. Of course they had. The new owners, a young couple with matching his and hers coffee mugs, smiled at me from across the room, probably wondering why the lawyer had insisted I have one final walkthrough before signing the last documents. Such a charming place, the wife said. We're so grateful your family decided to sell. I wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, I nodded and excused myself to the backyard one last time. 28 days. That's how long I'd been back. Back in my 17-year-old body, back to the week before everything fell apart, back to the moment when I could still save myself. But I wouldn't. Not yet. Through the kitchen window, I could see my sister Melissa's bedroom light on. She was probably resting again, pale and dramatic against her pillows, milking every moment of her mysterious illness, the same illness that would consume my parents' savings, my college fund, and eventually, this house. The same illness I'd spent 6 years desperately researching in my first life, working 3 jobs to help pay the medical bills that never seemed to end. The same illness I now knew, with absolute certainty, was completely curable with a simple change in environment and a specific combination of supplements that cost less than $200. My phone buzzed. Mom, sweetheart, can you come home? Melissa needs her medication, and your father and I are at the hospital waiting for test results. They think they've found something this time. They wouldn't. They never did. Because Melissa didn't have a rare disease. She had mold toxicity from the leak in her bedroom wall that Dad had been meaning to fix for 3 years, combined with a severe vitamin D deficiency and an undiagnosed gluten intolerance. Simple, fixable, nothing that required selling our family legacy. But in my first life, I hadn't known that until I was 23, drowning in community college debt, living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates, watching Melissa's social media posts from the bedroom that used to be mine in our family home, the home Dad had signed over to her for her recovery after they'd finally cured her mysterious ailment by moving her to Grandma's house in Arizona for 6 months. The bedroom with no mold. I died at 27, hit by a drunk driver on my way home from my 3rd job. My last thought had been of Melissa's Instagram post that morning, a picture of her engagement party at our childhood home, which she'd somehow convinced our parents to let her buy back at a family discount after they'd had to sell it. She wore the pearl necklace Grandma had promised to me, my inheritance. Another thing that had mysteriously gone to Melissa, because she needed something beautiful to look forward to during her recovery. Then I woke up here, 17, again. 1 week before the home sale was finalized. I need to go back further. You need to understand how we got here. I was 8 when Melissa was born, and for 8 perfect years, I'd been everything to my parents. Dad called me his little genius. Mom braided my hair every morning and packed my lunch with little notes. We lived in the most beautiful house, a 1920s craftsman that Grandpa had built himself, with a turret bedroom and a garden that bloomed year-round. It was supposed to be mine someday. Mom used to say it, pointing to my name carved in the oak tree in the backyard. This house has your heart in it, Natalie. It'll be yours one day. Then Melissa arrived, and slowly, so slowly I didn't notice until it was too late, I became invisible. At first it seemed normal. New baby needs attention. I got that. But when Melissa was 2 and still sleeping in my parents' room, and I was 10 and being told to be quieter, your sister is sensitive to noise, something shifted. When Melissa was 4 and threw a tantrum at my 11th birthday party because she wanted to blow out my candles, Mom let her blow out half of them to keep the peace. When I was 13 and made the state science fair, Dad missed it because Melissa had a recital where she sang off-key and forgot half the words, but they acted like she'd performed at Carnegie Hall. When I was 15 and got early acceptance to MIT with a full scholarship, they took me to dinner at Melissa's favorite restaurant where she cried because the waiter got her order wrong, and the entire meal became about comforting her. The house got worse every year. Dad was always too busy to fix things. The roof leaked into my bedroom, so I slept with a bucket next to my bed. The heating didn't reach the turret where my room was, so I wore 3 sweaters to bed in winter. But Melissa's room, the guest room they'd converted for her on the first floor, was always perfect. Fresh paint, new carpet, whatever she wanted. I didn't complain. I got straight A's, worked part-time at the library, saved every penny for college. I thought if I was just good enough, accomplished enough, they'd remember I existed too. Then, 2 months before my high school graduation, Melissa collapsed at school. The first hospital visit turned into dozens. Test after test came back inconclusive. She was tired all the time, dizzy, nauseous, losing weight. The doctors threw around words like chronic fatigue, autoimmune disorder, possible lupus, but nothing stuck. Nothing could be definitively diagnosed, and nothing could be definitively cured. The medical bills started piling up. Dad took out a second mortgage. Mom got a second job. My MIT scholarship covered tuition, but I'd need money for housing, food, books. My college fund, $20,000 of birthday money, summer job savings, and grandma's contributions, sat in a joint account with Mom's name on it. "We need to borrow from it," Mama Boss said one night, 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave for MIT. "Just temporarily, just until Melissa's diagnosis comes through and insurance covers everything retroactively." I was 17. What was I supposed to say? My sister was sick. Of course they could use the money. Temporarily lasted 6 years. I deferred MIT for a year, then another, then let the acceptance lapse entirely. I couldn't afford to go without my college fund, and every time I asked about the money, Mom cried and Dad got angry. "Your sister is dying, Natalie. How can you think about college at a time like this?" So I went to community college, lived at home, worked 3 jobs to save up again, putting every spare dollar into a new account they didn't have access to. Melissa got worse, or seemed to. She stopped going to school, stopped leaving her room most days. I'd come home at midnight from my shift at the diner to find my parents sitting in her room, holding her hands, praying. My turret bedroom got so bad from the water damage that mushrooms started growing from the baseboards. Dad promised to fix it, never did. I moved to the couch. Then came the real blow. 2 years into my community college degree, Mom sat me down. They were selling the house. They had to. Melissa needed a specialist treatment program across the country, $150,000, not covered by insurance. "We've already found a buyer," Dad said, not meeting my eyes. "They're offering a good price. We can cover Melissa's treatment and have enough left over for a small condo for your mother and me." "And me?" I asked. "Where do I go?" "You're an adult now, Natalie," Mom said softly. "It's time for you to start your own life anyway." I was 19 years old. I had $1,200 to my name, and they were selling my childhood home, my inheritance, the house that was supposed to be mine, without even asking how I felt about it. Melissa got her treatment. It didn't work, of course, because she didn't need treatment for a rare disease. But by the time she came home 6 months later, miraculously in remission, my parents were living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, and I was sleeping on a friend's floor, still working 3 jobs to stay in school. The house sold for $650,000. Every penny went to Melissa's medical care and my parents' debt. I got nothing. Then, like a knife to an already bleeding wound, Melissa got better. Completely better. She went back to school, thrived even. Started dating, got engaged at 22, and somehow, convinced our parents to let her buy back our childhood home. The home they'd sold for her medical bills, she bought back at a special family price of $300,000 using money from her trust fund. The trust fund Grandma had left that was supposed to be split between us, but had been temporarily redirected for her medical expenses. I found out about the house from Facebook. They didn't even tell me. I spent the next 4 years watching from a distance as Melissa renovated my childhood home, posted pictures of her perfect life, wore my inheritance around her neck, and never, not once, acknowledged what had been sacrificed for her. At 26, I finally got my associate degree. I was trying to save up for a bachelor's program, still working multiple jobs, exhausted and broke and alone. At 27, a drunk driver ran a red light, and I died thinking about how unfair it all was. Now I was back, and this time I knew the truth. The turning point came on a Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen table watching Mom cook dinner. Melissa was upstairs resting, and Dad was on his laptop researching experimental treatments in Germany that cost more than a car. "Natalie," Mom said, not looking up from the stove, "we need to talk about your college plans." Here it was. I knew what was coming because I'd lived it before. "Your father and I have been discussing it, and with everything going on with Melissa, we think it might be better if you stayed local. Community college first, then maybe transfer somewhere nearby. MIT is so far away, and we need you here. In my first life, I'd cried. I'd begged. I'd said MIT was my dream, my one chance. It hadn't mattered. This time, I just nodded. Okay. Mom looked surprised. Really? You're not upset? I understand, I said calmly. Family comes first. That night, alone in my water-damaged turret room, I made my decision. I wasn't going to tell them. Not about the mold, not about the vitamin D deficiency, not about the gluten. I wasn't going to save Melissa's health and let her steal my life again. Instead, I was going to save myself. I started with the house. I'd been so powerless in my first life, too young to have any legal standing, too conditioned to compliance to fight back. But I knew something now that I hadn't known then: Grandma's will. In my first life, I'd found out too late that Grandma had left the house to me specifically, not to my parents. The will had been clear. The Craftsman home on Maple Street shall pass to my granddaughter, Natalie Rose Cooper, on her 21st birthday. But Grandpa had left it to Dad in his will, and when Dad sold it, I'd been a minor with no power to stop him. By the time I learned about Grandma's wishes, it was too late. The house was sold, and legally, there was nothing I could do. But Grandma wasn't dead yet. She was 83, living in her condo in Arizona, sharp as ever. And I was 17 with all the knowledge of my first life. I called her the next day. Grandma, it's Natalie. Sweetheart. Her voice was warm, delighted. I was just thinking about you. How's school? It's good. Grandma, I need to ask you something about the house. There was a pause. What about it, dear? I know Grandpa left it to Dad, but I found some papers. I lied smoothly, let my voice shake a little. Papers that said you wanted me to have it eventually. Was that true? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, she said finally, Huh? I did. I made that clear when your grandfather was drafting his will, but we disagreed. He thought your father should have it, pass it down when he was ready. I wanted to make sure it went to you directly. You were always the one who loved that house most. Can you do that? I asked. Even though Grandpa already left it to Dad? The house is in your father's name now, Grandma said slowly. But I could talk to him, make sure he understands my wishes, make it clear in my own will. Would you? I pressed. Soon, I have this feeling that I need to make sure. Call it intuition. Grandma laughed softly. You always were perceptive, darling. Yes. I'll call my lawyer this week. 2 days later, Dad got a call from Grandma's lawyer. I accidentally overheard through the door. I don't care what your intentions are, David. Grandma's voice crackled through the speakerphone, sharp and commanding. That house was built by my husband, and I have strong feelings about where it ends up. I've instructed my lawyer to draw up documents making it clear that the property should pass directly to Natalie, either through a transfer now or through trust after my death. I'm also establishing a fund to cover the property taxes until she turns 25. Mom, we're not planning to sell, Dad said, but his voice was weak. See that you don't, Grandma said. Because if I find out that house has been sold without Natalie's direct benefit and consent, I'll contest it with every lawyer I can afford. And David, you know I can afford quite a few. When Dad hung up, I heard him swear. Heard Mom ask what was wrong. My mother is putting the house in Natalie's name, he said, or at least making it impossible for us to sell it without involving her. But Melissa's treatment. We'll figure something else out. I smiled in my turret room, surrounded by water stains and mold. First move made. The next phase required more finesse. I needed Melissa to get better, but only after my parents had exhausted every other option. Only after they'd learned what it felt like to sacrifice everything and get nothing in return. I started small. I knew Melissa's symptoms were triggered primarily by her bedroom environment and her diet, so I made them worse. I volunteered to clean her room, something I'd never done in my first life. Mom was so surprised she almost cried. That's so sweet of you, honey. I dusted carefully, making sure to disturb the mold colonies I knew were growing behind her furniture. Opened her window, letting in moisture from the overwatered garden. Rearranged things so the airflow was worse, not better. For meals, I started cooking pasta dishes, fresh bread, gluten heavy comfort foods that Mom praised and Melissa devoured. You're so good to your sister, Mom said, watching Melissa eat the third helping of my homemade lasagna. Melissa got worse. Of course she did. More hospital visits, more tests, more bills. I watched Dad's face grow drawn, watched Mom start sleeping in Melissa's room, watched their savings evaporate. And I went about my business. I accepted a job at the library that paid minimum wage but gave me access to medical databases. I enrolled in community college classes, but only part-time, only enough to look dutiful. I saved every penny in my secret account, the one they'd never known about even in my first life. I also started documenting everything, every medical bill, every test result, every doctor's note. I scanned them all, saved them to a cloud drive, evidence of the money spent, the sacrifice made. At Thanksgiving, Dad brought up the house. Natalie, he said, his voice heavy, your grandmother's trust means we can't sell the house without your permission. But Melissa needs treatment. The specialist in Houston thinks they've found something. It'll cost $200,000. We need you to sign papers allowing us to take a loan against the house. In my first life, this was the moment they'd told me they were selling. But Grandma's intervention had changed things. Now they needed my consent. I looked at Melissa, pale and thin, barely touching her food. Looked at my parents, exhausted and desperate. No, I said softly. The silence was deafening. What? Mom whispered. I said no. Grandma left me the house because she wanted me to have it. I'm not going to let you destroy that. Your sister is sick, Dad said, his voice rising. She could die. Then find another way, I said, standing up. Take out a loan against your retirement. Sell your cars. Start a GoFundMe. But you're not touching my inheritance. Mom started crying. Dad looked at me like I was a stranger. Melissa just stared, her eyes wide and wounded. How can you be so selfish? Mom sobbed. I'd heard those words before in 100 variations in my first life. They'd haunted me for years. This time, I let them bounce off. I'm not being selfish, I said calmly. I'm being practical. You've already spent my college fund, money that was mine, without asking. You're not getting the house, too. I left the table, went upstairs, listened to them rage and cry below me. That night, Melissa came to my room. She could barely walk, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Natalie, she whispered, please, I'm so scared. In my first life, this would have broken me. This time I saw it clearly, the manipulation, the performance, the same tactics she'd been using since she was 2 years old to get whatever she wanted. You're not dying, Melissa, I said, not looking up from my book. You're sick, but you're not dying. There's a difference. You don't know that. Actually, I do. She left, crying. I heard her tell Mom that I was cruel and hateful. Heard Mom comfort her, promise her they'd find another way. They did. They sold Mom's jewelry, Dad's vintage car, collection. They took out loans and maxed out credit cards. And they sent Melissa to Houston. The treatment failed, of course, because she didn't need treatment for a rare disease. I waited. 6 months passed. Melissa came home from Houston no better, arguably worse. My parents were drowning in debt. They'd had to move out of their bedroom and into the guest room to save on heating costs. They'd sold everything of value except the house, and I'd been busy. I was 18 now, halfway through my second semester at community college, still working at the library. But I'd also been doing something else. Research. Real research. Using my knowledge from my first life combined with resources my 17-year-old self had never had. I knew Melissa's illness was environmental and dietary, but proving it, making sure no one could deny it, required data. So I'd collected it. I'd secretly tested the mold in Melissa's room using a kit I'd ordered online. Documented the species, Stachybotrys chartarum, Black mold, toxic, known to cause every symptom Melissa exhibited. I'd taken pictures of the water damage, the poor ventilation, the moisture buildup, time-stamped them all. I'd also started tracking Melissa's diet, cross-referencing her worst symptom days with what she ate. The pattern was obvious. Gluten made her sick, every single time. And I'd sent samples of our house's air quality to a lab, paying with my secret savings. The results came back exactly as I'd known they would. Dangerous levels of mold spores and mycotoxins. I had everything I needed. But I didn't tell them. Not yet. Instead, I waited for the breaking point. It came on a Tuesday morning. Dad had a heart attack, minor, but enough to hospitalize him overnight. The stress, the bills, the endless worry. Mom called me at the library, hysterical. "Natalie, you have to come home. Your father—" I took a bus to the hospital. Found Mom in the waiting room, looking 10 years older than she was. "He's going to be okay," she said, but her hands were shaking. "But the medical bills—" "Natalie, I don't know what to do. We're drowning. The house is all we have left. And with your grandmother's trust, we can't even—" "I'll sign," I said. She looked up, hope and suspicion warring in her eyes. "What?" "I'll sign papers letting you take a loan against the house," I said. "On one condition." "Anything." "I want Melissa to move out of her bedroom." Mom blinked. "What? Why?" "Because I think her room is making her sick," I said. I pulled out my folder of evidence, 6 months of careful documentation. "Look, I've been researching. The mold in her room, the water damage, the poor air circulation. Black mold causes every symptom she has. Plus, I think she has a gluten intolerance. If we move her to a different room, preferably somewhere dry with good airflow, and change her diet, I bet she'll start getting better." Mom stared at the papers, at the lab results, at the photos. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "If it was just mold, the doctors would have found it." "They didn't test for it," I said. "They tested for diseases. They never looked at her environment." "You're saying my daughter has been suffering for 2 years because of mold?" "I'm saying it's possible," I said carefully. "And if I'm right, you don't need expensive treatments. You need a $200 dehumidifier and a gluten-free diet. Isn't it worth trying before you destroy your finances completely?" Mom looked at me for a long moment. I could see her wanting to dismiss it, wanting to call me cruel or selfish for suggesting something so simple after they'd sacrificed so much. But she was desperate, and I'd given her evidence she couldn't ignore. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, we'll try it." We moved Melissa to my room, the dry, well-ventilated turret. I took her moldy cave of a bedroom without complaint. Mom hired someone to finally fix the water damage and properly clean the mold, but only after Melissa was out. I also took over cooking all of Melissa's meals, gluten-free, carefully prepared. Mom was too exhausted to argue. Within 3 days, Melissa's nausea improved. Within a week, her energy started returning. Within 2 weeks, she could get out of bed without help. Within a month, she was back to her normal self, pale and dramatic, but healthy. The change was miraculous, undeniable. Mama and Dad were shocked, grateful, confused. They took Melissa back to her doctors, who confirmed she was in remission. No one could explain why. The doctor suggested her immune system had finally fought off whatever rare disease she'd had. Only I knew the truth. "Natalie," Mom said one night, tears in her eyes, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved your sister's life." "I'm just glad she's better," I said, smiling. But I didn't sign the papers for the house loan. "Dad's recovered now," I pointed out. "And Melissa's better. You don't need the money anymore." The look on Mom's face was complicated. Relief, yes. But also something else, the dawning realization of what they'd almost lost. What they'd been willing to sacrifice. They didn't push it. How could they? I'd saved Melissa. I was the hero now. But here's the thing. I hadn't told them how I knew. I hadn't explained my research methods, my certainty, my months of secret documentation. As far as they knew, I'd had a lucky hunch and happened to be right. They didn't know that I'd let Melissa suffer for 6 more months when I could have fixed it immediately. They didn't know that I'd made her worse with my helpful cooking and cleaning. They didn't know that every day I'd watched her deteriorate, I'd been planning, and they never would. The real revenge started now. Melissa, healthy and energetic, immediately wanted her old room back. Natalie's room has better light, she whined. And it's bigger. It's not fair that she gets it. Melissa, Dad said, uncomfortable. Natalie gave up her room so you could get better. And I'm better now, Melissa says, so I should get the better room. That's only fair. I watched this play out with detached amusement. In my first life, I would have given in. This time, I just smiled. No, I said simply, this is my room now. Melissa gaped at me. She wasn't used to hearing me say no. Mom, she appealed. Mom looked between us, clearly torn, but something had shifted. Melissa, honey, Natalie's right. She gave up her room for you. It's hers now. Melissa burst into tears and locked herself in her new room, the room that was perfectly clean and mold-free now that I'd forced them to fix it. That summer, I turned 19. Grandma came to visit, her first trip back since Arizona, and she brought her lawyer. I want to transfer the house to Natalie now, she announced at dinner. No waiting until 21. She's an adult, she's proven herself responsible, and frankly, David, I don't trust you not to do something stupid in the next 2 years. Dad turned red. Mom looked stricken. Melissa stared at me with undisguised hatred. This is ridiculous, Dad said. I'm her father. This is my house. My father left it to me. And I'm your mother, Grandma said coldly, sons. And I helped pay off the mortgage after your father died. I have more claim to this house than you want to admit. Natalie is getting it, and she's getting it now. Fight me on it, and I'll make sure you don't see another cent of my estate. The papers were signed within a week. The house, my childhood home, my inheritance, was mine. Legally, officially, completely mine. My parents and Melissa had to ask my permission to live there. I didn't kick them out. I wasn't cruel. But I made them pay rent, below market rate, but rent nonetheless. I have property taxes to cover, I explained reasonably. And if I'm going to finish college, I need income. Dad wanted to argue. How could he? I'd saved Melissa. I'd given up my room. I'd let them stay in my house. The power dynamic had completely reversed. I enrolled in online classes at MIT. They'd started a new program for remote learners. I worked from my turret room studying engineering, using the rent money from my parents to pay for my education. Melissa started community college too, but she struggled. She'd missed so much school during her illness that she was behind. She'd also grown used to being coddled, catered to, centered. Can you help me with my math homework? She asked one day. No, I said, not looking up from my own work. I'm busy. But you're good at math. Then you should have paid attention in class when you had the chance. She went to Mom crying. Mom came to me. Natalie, she's your sister. Can't you help her? I'm not her tutor, I said. If she wants help, she can hire one. We can't afford... That's not my problem. The words hung in the air between us. Mom's face crumpled. You've changed, she said quietly. Ever since Melissa got sick, you've become so hard. I've become practical, I corrected. I've learned to take care of myself since no one else will. That night, I heard Mom crying in her bedroom. I felt a tiny pang of guilt, but mostly I felt satisfaction. They were finally understanding what they'd done to me, finally feeling what I'd felt for years. But I wasn't done. Not even close. 2 years later, I graduated from MIT's online program with a degree in biomedical engineering. I'd spent those 2 years not just studying, but also working. I'd gotten a remote internship with a pharmaceutical company, then a full position. By the time I turned 21, I was making 6 figures. Melissa, meanwhile, had dropped out of community college. She'd gotten a job at a retail store, hated it, quit. She was living at home, my home, working part-time at a coffee shop, dating a guy our parents disapproved of, generally drifting. She also wasn't paying rent anymore. She can't afford it, Mom had said, asking if I'd waive Melissa's portion. She's struggling. Then she should get a better job, I said. Or she can move out. Where would she go? That's her problem to solve. I did waive the rent. but only because having them dependent on me was its own kind of power. My parents had aged dramatically. Dad's hair had gone completely gray. Mom had stress lines around her eyes that made her look a decade older. The financial strain of Melissa's illness, the bills they were still paying off, had broken something in them. They'd also started to understand what they had done. I saw it in the way Dad looked at me sometimes, a kind of confused regret, like he wasn't sure when his little genius had become this stranger who held all the cards. In the way Mom tried to bridge the gap with small gestures, my favorite meals, comments about my childhood, attempts to recreate our old closeness. But it was too late for that. The daughter who would have melted at those gestures was gone. She'd died on the side of the road at 27 in a different timeline. The woman I was now had no interest in forgiveness. On my 21st birthday, Grandma died. She'd been sick for a few months. She'd told me privately, but made me promise not to tell anyone else. I want to go out on my own terms, she'd said, without a fuss. At the reading of her will, my parents learned that Grandma had left everything to me. Her condo, her savings, her stocks, $1.2 million total. Melissa got $5,000 to buy something pretty. Dad got nothing. "This is a mistake," Dad said, his voice hollow. "She wouldn't—" "It's not a mistake," the lawyer said when Mrs. Cooper was very clear. She revised this will 3 years ago and confirmed it again 6 months before her death. 3 years ago. Right after I'd called her about the house. Mom looked at me across the lawyer's office. "Did you know about this?" "Yes," I said. "Grandma and I talked regularly." "And you didn't think to mention that she was leaving me her estate? Why would I? It's not your business." Melissa stood up, her chair scraping loudly, but this is bullshit. She was my grandmother too. "And you got $5,000, I said calmly, "which is more than I got of my own college fund." The silence was devastating. We left the lawyer's office in separate cars. At home, my home, I found Mom waiting for me in the kitchen. "I want to talk about the house," she said. "What about it?" "Your father and I are thinking about moving out. Getting our own place. It's time." I nodded slowly. "Okay, when?" "End of the month." She looked uncomfortable. "Unless you need us to stay longer for the rent?" "No," I said. "End of the month is fine." "What about Melissa?" "What about her?" "Will you let her stay? She can't afford her own place yet." I considered this. In my first life, Melissa had bought this house from my parents and lived in it for years, posting her perfect life all over social media while I struggled to make rent. The idea of her staying here, dependent on my generosity, was delicious. "She can stay," I said, "but she pays full rent, market rate, no more family discounts." "Natalie, she makes minimum wage. Then she should get a better job, or get a roommate, or live somewhere cheaper." I met Mom's eyes. "You taught me to be practical, remember? To understand that life isn't fair?" "Well, I learned." Mom's face crumpled, but she didn't argue further. My parents moved out 3 weeks later. They found a small apartment across town. Dad had finally accepted a job he'd been turning down for years. Better pay but longer hours. They needed the money to finish paying off their debt. Melissa stayed, paying the rent I demanded from her minimum wage job plus tips. She was miserable, constantly complaining, but I didn't care. I had other plans to execute. I started by renovating the house, completely. I hired contractors to restore it to its original 1920s glory. Everything Grandpa had built, everything that made it special. I fixed every leak, every crack, every worn board. I removed all traces of the neglect it had suffered during my childhood. Melissa's old bedroom, the moldy one that had caused her illness, I turned into a home office for myself. I had the walls tested, professionally remediated, and rebuilt. Every trace of the mold that had stolen 2 years of all our lives was gone. But I kept the documentation, the photos, the lab results, the medical bills. I kept all of it. I also started building something else, a business. Using my degree and my inheritance, I developed a mold detection device, a small, affordable sensor that could alert homeowners to dangerous mold before it made them sick. It was the product I wished had existed when we needed it. The company took off. Within a year, we'd sold 10,000 units. Within 2 years, I was negotiating with major home improvement chains for a wide distribution. By my 23rd birthday, I was worth $10 million. Melissa watched all of this from her minimum wage job at the coffee shop. She tried to ask me for a job, for an investment, for help. I'd said no to all of it. "You're my sister," she'd said, tears in her eyes. "And you're my tenant," I'd replied. "Who's late on rent again?" She'd moved out finally, splitting a studio with 2 other girls. Mom called me, crying, saying I'd been too hard on her. "She's 23 years old," I said. "It's time she learned to take care of herself." "Like you had to?" Mom's voice was sharp. "Is that what this is about? You're punishing her for being sick?" "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm just not rescuing her either. There's a difference." But that wasn't entirely true. I was punishing her, I was punishing all of them, and I was just getting started. The final act of my revenge came on Melissa's 25th birthday. By then, I was 28, the age I'd died in my first life. I'd planned this moment for years. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated, every piece of evidence preserved. I invited the family to dinner at the house, my house, fully restored and beautiful. Mom and Dad came nervously. They'd barely been back since moving out. Melissa came reluctantly, probably hoping I'd give her money as a birthday present. I'd hired a caterer, set the dining room table with Grandma's china, the china that was mine now. Everything looked perfect. "This is lovely," Mom said, looking around. "The house is beautiful, Natalie. You've done amazing work." "Thank you," I said. "Please sit down. I want to talk to you all about something." They sat. They probably expected some kind of reconciliation speech, maybe an announcement about wanting to be closer to family. Melissa looked bored. Dad looked uncomfortable. Mom looked hopeful. I took a deep breath and began. "I want to talk about Melissa's illness," I said. Melissa rolled her eyes. "Do we have to? That was years ago." "Yes," I said firmly. We do, because there's something I never told you, something important." I pulled out the folder I'd been keeping for 8 years, since my first life, really. The documentation, the evidence, the truth. "Melissa, you were never dying," I said. "You had mold toxicity, vitamin D deficiency, and a gluten intolerance. All treatable. All fixable for less than $200. The table went silent. "That's ridiculous," Melissa said. "I had a rare disease. The doctors never found anything," I interrupted, "because there was nothing rare to find. You were sick because your bedroom had black mold from water damage Dad never fixed. You were sick because you were vitamin D deficient and eating foods that triggered an intolerance. That's it." I spread the papers on the table, the test results, the photos, the medical research I'd compiled. "I figured this out 8 years ago," I said. Before you ever went to Houston, before Dad had his heart attack, before Mom sold her jewelry, I knew." Mom's face had gone pale. "That's not possible. You were only 17. "I was smart enough," I said. "I did the research, I ran the tests, I documented everything. And then I fixed it, moved you out of that room, changed your diet. You got better immediately, remember?" Melissa was shaking her head. "But why wouldn't you tell us sooner if you knew?" "Because I wanted you to suffer," I said simply. The silence was complete. "I wanted you to know what it felt like to sacrifice everything for someone who didn't appreciate it. To watch your money disappear, to feel powerless and forgotten. I wanted Mom and Dad to understand what they'd done to me, spending my college fund, trying to take my inheritance, making me invisible for your entire life." "Natalie," Dad started. "I'm not finished," I said coldly. "Do you know what happened in my first life before I came back?" They stared at me, confused. You sold this house. Sold my inheritance to pay for Melissa's treatments. Treatments she didn't need. I ended up in community college, working 3 jobs, sleeping on friends' couches. And Melissa? She recovered eventually, just like she did this time. And then she bought back this house, my house, for a fraction of what you sold it for. She lived here, posted pictures of her perfect life while I scraped by in poverty. You gave her my inheritance, my college fund, my entire childhood home, and none of you ever apologized. None of you ever even acknowledged what you'd taken from me. You're not making sense, Melissa said. That didn't happen. We didn't sell the house because I stopped you, I said. Because I came back knowing what you'd do, and I made sure it couldn't happen. I called Grandma. I documented your illness. I let you suffer just long enough to drain your resources, but not long enough to make you sell my home. And then I fixed you, just enough to keep you alive, but not enough to make you thrive. Mom stood up, her chair scraping back. This is insane. You're talking like you lived some other life. Like you time traveled or something. Believe what you want, I said. It doesn't matter. What matters is that in this life, I won. I have the house. I have Grandma's money. I have a successful business. And you have nothing except the scraps I allow you to keep. Melissa was crying now. How can you be so cruel? I was sick. I could have died, but you didn't, I said. Because even while I was punishing you, I made sure you'd survive, which is more than you ever did for me. I stood up, looking at each of them in turn. I want you to understand something. Every single day, I wake up in this house, the house that should have been mine all along. I look at my bank account, my company, my success, and I think about how in my first life, you took all of this from me. You gave it to Melissa because she cried and manipulated and played the victim better than I ever could. I was sick, Melissa shouted. You were spoiled, I corrected. You were used to getting everything you wanted, and when you actually faced adversity, you milked it for all it was worth. Even now, even after years of being healthy, you're still playing the victim, still acting like the world owes you something. And what do you want from us? Dad asked quietly. What is this dinner for? To gloat? To confess, I said. I want you to know what I did. I want you to understand that I had the power to save you all years of suffering, and I chose not to use it. I let you lose everything that mattered, your savings, your dignity, your peace. I watched you age and break under the stress, and I felt nothing but satisfaction. Mom was crying silently, her hands over her mouth. I want you to know, I continued, that every time you asked me for help, every time you expected me to just give in like I always had, I was making a choice. I was choosing me over you, the way you chose Melissa over me for 19 years. We never, Mom started. You did, I said flatly. You spent my college fund. You tried to take my house. You made me sleep in a water-damaged room with mushrooms growing from the walls while Melissa got a freshly painted bedroom. You missed my achievements to attend her mediocre performances. You taught me that I was worth less than her, that my needs were less important, that I should always sacrifice for her. I picked up my wine glass, took a sip, set it down carefully. So I stopped. I stopped sacrificing. I stopped being the good daughter. And I took everything that should have been mine all along. The silence stretched on. I think you should leave now, Skesa. I said, Melissa, I'm selling the house. You have 30 days to find a new place. Mom, Dad, I don't want to see you again unless it's on my terms. Natalie, please, Mom whispered. No, I said, no more pleases, no more chances. You made your choices. Now live with them. They left, all 3 of them, shell-shocked and crying. I watched them go from the window of my turret room, the room I'd fought to keep, the room that was mine now. I should have felt guilty, remorseful, something. Instead, I just felt free. 5 years later, I'm 33 years old. I never did sell the house. I realized I didn't actually want to leave. Instead, I renovated it further, turned part of it into a showcase for my company. We're developing new products now: air quality monitors, water damage detectors, allergen sensors. Everything that could have helped my family if we'd had access to it. We're worth 50 million now. I've been profiled in Forbes, invited to speak at conferences, courted by venture capitalists wanting to invest. I bought out the entire block around my childhood home, turned it into a small campus for my company. My employees walk past the house where I grew up every day, past the oak tree with my name carved in it. Melissa works for a marketing firm in another city. She's married now, has a baby. I found out from Facebook. She sent me a baby announcement. I didn't respond. Mom and Dad are retired, living in a small condo in Florida. Dad's health never fully recovered from his heart attack. They live on Social Security and whatever savings they managed to rebuild. It's not much. They try to contact me sometimes. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, apologetic emails. I don't respond to those either, but I did do one thing. I set up a trust fund. It pays out $3,000 a month to my parents and $2,000 a month to Melissa, enough to live on, enough to survive, not enough to thrive. The trust has conditions. They can't contact me. They can't visit. They can't try to see me at public events. If they break these rules, the trust dissolves and they get nothing. They've never broken the rules. Sometimes I wonder if I'm a monster, if the revenge I took was disproportionate to the crime. But then I remember sleeping on that couch in my first life, watching Melissa post pictures from my childhood home, wearing my grandmother's pearls, living the life that should have been mine. And I remember, I gave them more than they gave me. They took everything and left me with nothing. I left them with enough. That's not cruelty, that's justice. Last week I got a letter. It was from Melissa, sent to my office instead of my home. "Dear Natalie," it began, "I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I'm willing to give up the trust for a chance to talk. I need you to know something. I've been in therapy for 3 years, working through everything that happened, and I've come to understand something I didn't before. You were right. Not about having lived another life. I still don't understand that, but about everything else. Mom and Dad did treat you unfairly. They did sacrifice your needs for mine, and I let them. I encouraged it even. I was so used to being the center of attention, so used to getting what I wanted, that I never stopped to think about what it cost you. I can't apologize enough. I know that. And I know you probably don't care about my apology anyway, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see what we did to you, and I'm sorry. I also want you to know that you were wrong about one thing. I wasn't manipulating anyone. I was really sick. I remember the pain, the exhaustion, the fear. I know you say it was just mold and gluten, but it felt like dying. It felt real. The fact that you knew how to fix it and didn't, that you let me suffer to prove a point, that's something I'm still struggling to process. My therapist says it's complex trauma, that you were both victim and perpetrator, but I also understand why you did it. That's what I wanted to tell you. I understand now. And even though it hurts, even though I wish things had been different, I accept responsibility for my part in driving you to it. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If you don't, I understand that too. Either way, I'm grateful that you at least made sure we'd survive, that you gave us the trust even after everything. That's more grace than I probably deserved. Your sister, Melissa. I read the letter 3 times, then I filed it away in my desk drawer. I haven't responded. I don't know if I will, because here's the truth. Her apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't give me back the years I lost in my first life. It doesn't undo the trauma of being invisible in my own family. It doesn't heal the betrayal, but it also doesn't make me feel as satisfied as I thought it would. Maybe that's the real cruelty of revenge. Even when you win, even when you get everything you wanted, there's still a hollowness at the center of it. Or maybe I'm just tired. I'm 33 now, 6 years older than I was when I died before. I've lived a whole second life, and I've spent most of it consumed by anger and retribution. I've achieved everything I wanted: success, wealth, power, justice. But I'm alone, completely alone. My company is successful, but I have no one to share it with. My house is beautiful, but I'm the only one who lives in it. I've cut off everyone who ever hurt me, and in doing so, I've cut off everyone who ever loved me too. Was it worth it? I don't know, but I do know this. I'd do it all again. Every calculated move, every cold decision, every moment of withheld compassion. Because in my first life, I was the one who suffered. I was the one who lost everything. In this life, they learned what that felt like. And that, at least, is something. I look out my window at the oak tree in the backyard. My name is still carved there, Natalie RC. 8 years old, permanent, mine. This house was always meant to be mine. This life was always meant to be mine. I just had to die to claim it. And now that I have it, now that I've taken back everything they stole and made them understand the cost, I can finally rest. Or maybe I can finally figure out what comes after revenge. Maybe there's still time for that. I fold Melissa's letter and put it back in the drawer. Not ready to respond, but not ready to throw it away either. Outside, the sun is setting over my property, my company, my empire, built from spite and second chances. I won. That has to be enough. That has to be enough.